Ahoy! Welcome back to Leia's Library. Find yourself a cozy corner, get yourself a cozy drink, and let's get started. Today I will be reviewing all of the Jane Austen books and doing shallow to deep dives on all of them, depending on how I'm feeling about them, so that we can establish which ones are my favorite. This was a video request from somebody, so you know who you are if you're watching. And I thought it sounded like a really fun idea because I love me some Jane Austen. I enjoy all of her books. I have all of her books. Even the ones that I don't like as much, I still think they're good. She just has ones that are better. So this list is going to be going from my least favorites to my favorite. And yeah, I'm really excited. Let's get into it. So my lowest ranked Austen is coincidentally her first ever published book. It is Sense and Sensibility. Our two main characters here are sisters Eleanor and Marianne, who are the respective embodiments of good sense and strong sensibility, or emotion, I guess, emotionality. Their father dies and their brother promptly kicks them out of their house. Yay. And they are forced to downsize to a little cottage because they can't afford anything else. And it's at this cottage that both sisters experience love, loss, and heartache in their own unique ways. So this one is ranked lowest probably because, well, for a few reasons. One of which is that it just stuck with me the least. I haven't reread any of them for this review. Some of them I've read quite a few times. Some of them I've only read once, but of all of them, including the ones that I've only read once, I remembered the least from this one. And to me, if I barely remember what happened, to me that means I wasn't super interested in what was going on. But then I did look up a synopsis just so that I would have something to talk about, and it did click. But initially, nothing really took root. The only thing I really remembered was a vague sense of misery, so that wasn't a good sign. Another thing in this book is that it really wants me to root for one of our very young protagonists, our 16-year-old protagonist, to marry a man 20 years older than her. I just couldn't. I know that that happened at the time, that was fairly common, but that's always been like something that makes me really uncomfortable. Even like in real life, couples with large age differences always make me a little uncomfortable. I know there are some exceptions. I respect that. I respect people's choices. It's just when it is initially brought up to me, my first instinct is to go, And to be fair, the man that's 20 years older than her is a very nice man. I just couldn't wrap my head around them being together. I also just didn't think the arcs were quite as strong in Sense and Sensibility as they were in later books. Marianne's, to me, was actually kind of depressing. Her story seemed to be one of just learning to settle, learning to settle on a safe and comfortable marriage rather than one out of love. And it implies that she's going to fall in love with him, but it still just made me kind of sad. It just kind of bummed me out, you know? And, you know, this was Jane Austen's first ever book, so, and you can see some of the themes and the characteristics that she will use in later books, and I just think they're better used later on. I think this almost seemed like a work in progress, or like a bouncing off point, but she got there in later books. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about Sense and Sensibility. Next one on the list is Mansfield Park. I really like this cover. I find it very pretty. So Mansfield Park, our heroine is Fanny Price, and Fanny was taken from the poverty of her parents' house when she was 10 years old and sent to live with some of her very rich cousins at Mansfield Park. And Fanny is routinely reminded of her supremely humble beginnings. There's always sort of a wall between her and the rest of the family, except by her cousin Edmund, who becomes her sole ally, pretty much. we watch her grow up, and several years pass, and while her uncle is away, this family called the Crawfords come for a visit, and they bring with them all of the glamour and the recklessness of London life. My main gripe with this book is that it's just a very strange reading experience in the 21st century. There are things that have not aged very well. At a certain point, some of the very well-to-do characters decide that they want to have fun and they want to put on a play. Just for themselves, just for fun. And you'd think they'd suggested starting up a meth lab with the way that some of the other characters react. And I get it, culturally, at the time, acting wasn't very well regarded. It wasn't for a high society. It was associated with a lot of, debauchery, which, as an actor, I find hilarious. But, heck, it's not like they're putting on a production of Spring Awakening. I think everyone can calm down just a little bit. The other thing that didn't age spectacularly well is that Fanny's love interest is, it's her cousin. So that's that. And not only is he her cousin, but they were essentially raised as brother and sister, so adds a whole other layer of ick. And because it's something that was completely acceptable at the time, they just keep bringing it up. And which, as a reader, just made me so uncomfortable. So yeah, that, it's very strange to read in the 21st century. Aside from that, I just find Fanny to be the least interesting of the Austen leading ladies. She's very meek and very mousy and just altogether not super compelling. She doesn't really do anything. She mostly just reacts to things that happen to her or are happening around her. It just isn't quite as interesting. I think the rest of the story is fine. I don't think it's a bad story by any means. So it's fine. If you can handle cousins slowly falling in love, then sure, go for it. Maybe you'll enjoy it more than I did. But yeah, it's perfectly fine. Just shan't be going any higher on the list. Next up is the shortest one. It's Persuasion. I picked this copy up in Bath, very fittingly. Our heroine this time is Anne Elliot, a lady of 27 years, which of course means that she's a hair's breadth away from being an old maid, because she's unmarried. Anne was engaged to a man named Frederick Wentworth some years prior, but she was persuaded by her friends and family to break off the engagement. They were very fond of each other, but her friends and family thought that she could do better, essentially. And now, 7 years later, the two are reconnected when Frederick's brother begins renting out Anne's family home, and they're offered a second chance at what they once had. I actually didn't like Persuasion the first time I read it. I thought it was boring, to be honest. But then I read it a few years later, and I was like, oh no, I this is actually pretty good. I actually do enjoy this. This one definitely has a little bit more of a melancholy tone to it, or a melancholy atmosphere, at least at first. It gets better, and more so than the others, aside from Sense and Sensibility. But for this one, it's more of a reflective, kind of nostalgic melancholia tinged with regret at things that could have been. And, watching these two come together after several years as different people than who they used to be, and learning to not listen to others and focus on what makes them happy and is how to find their own happiness is actually quite satisfying. This book also has the most hilarious scene of a man passionately scribbling down all of his feelings for the person who is standing 3 meters away from him, and then handing her the letter instead of just speaking to her like a normal human being. Priceless. Okay, now we're at my top 3. So number 3 on the list is Northanger Abbey. and I'm really sad that I don't have a prettier copy of this. I did not realize I was gonna like it as much as I did, so I cheaped out on a copy, but now I'm looking for a prettier one. So this follows Catherine Morland, a 17-year-old country girl who is, country girl has such a weird connotation. She's not a modern day country girl. She is a girl who lives in the country. And she is invited to spend a few weeks in Bath with a family friend. And when she's there, she meets and falls head over heels in love with a Henry Tilney, who ends up inviting her to his family estate, Northanger Abbey. Northanger Abbey is a old Gothic mansion. It's full of a lot of mysterious rooms and twists and turns. And Catherine is a great lover of Gothic literature and Gothic thrillers. And she lets her imagination be completely swept away by this place. And she starts focusing in on, you know, all of the mysteries that are there that she half creates, such as the mystery surrounding the death of Henry's mother, and can his father be trusted? Can Henry be trusted? Ooh. So this book is often described as like a Gothic parody because there's a lot of commentary on Gothic tropes, which are really fun. They're really fun to read if you're familiar with Gothic literature, which I am, and I quite enjoy Gothic literature, so I thought it was delightful. They really do, you know, parody a lot of the Gothic elements, like an old mysterious mansion, or a death that has some suspicious circumstances around it. Was it actually murder? But they're all just kind of having a laugh about it, except for Catherine, who is deeply invested. My favorite part is Catherine starts getting way too carried away and is like fixated on Henry's mother's death. And she's talking to Henry about it, and she just keeps going and going until she like begins to wonder out loud if maybe Henry's father might have had a hand in her death. And Henry just looks at her like, "That's my dad." Like, sir, this is a Wendy's. It was delightful. So yeah, I don't really have much more to say about it. I just really enjoyed it. Characters are very fun. Setting is excellent. Would very strongly recommend. My second favorite is Emma. I really like this book. This is about Emma Woodhouse. Emma is a rich, precocious, spoiled young woman who is supremely confident in her abilities as a matchmaker. However, her eagerness to play with the lives of the people in her little sleepy village lead to devastating effect. And by devastating effect, I mean like Austen levels of devastating effect. You know, nobody dies. Nobody becomes destitute. Nobody gets sick. Everybody's fine by the end. That's why we like Austen. That's why I like Austen. The stakes are never too high. They're just high enough where like you care about them, but they're not so high that you feel depressed about possible consequences. Anyway, I love this book. It's just such a good read. Because Emma is such an awful person at the beginning. She's so self-obsessed and arrogant, but she's also so charming and witty. So it's impossible to outright hate her, or I don't know, maybe it's possible for you. That's fair. It's impossible for me to outright hate her. And like you get glimpses that there is good in her. Like, you see how she's always really concerned about her father, who's a major hypochondriac. He's a delight, but also kind of annoying. He always thinks that he's dying, or everything's going to go terribly wrong, and everyone's going to get sick, and everyone's going to die. And she's just so patient with him, and she genuinely cares about, you know, his peace of mind. But then she's also super condescending and thinks she's a little bit above most everyone in this place. So there is good. You just don't see it super often at the beginning. But you watch as she makes mistake after egregious mistake and pays the full consequences for them, and learns her lesson, and then immediately unlearns it and goes and does it again and suffers the same consequences, but worse this time. And just her journey to learning how to be a good person is such a fun read. I just thoroughly enjoy this book. It's such a good time. It is, I think it's the longest one. It does feel a little long at some points, like it probably could have been edited down a bit, but I don't even care. I just have a great time. And I really like this cover. It's so pretty. I'm such a big fan of pretty book covers. Yeah, Emma should read it. I forgot to say this in my intro, but I thought it would be fitting for the occasion to wear my Regency dress, even though you can't really see most of it. Like, this silhouette is flattering to basically nobody, but boy, is this a comfortable dress to lounge around in. Anyway, on to my last one and my very favorite Austen book. Of course it's Pride and Prejudice. I don't make the rules. I just follow them. So, for those unaware, this follows Elizabeth Bennet, who is one of 5 daughters in the Bennet family. She's very outspoken and witty and fiercely intelligent, and she takes an immediate dislike to one of the new neighborhood residents, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. She finds him to be very cold and very pompous, and very proud. But as she meets more residents and deals with a significant family scandal, she learns more about Mr. Darcy, and she grows to appreciate the difference between superficial goodness and actual goodness. It leads her to consider that perhaps first impressions are not always quite so accurate. This is the best Jane Austen book. I don't make the rules, I just follow them. Yes, it may be cliche, but sometimes things are cliche for a reason. Even if it's cliche, it doesn't make it any less true. So Lizzie Bennet is one of my all-time favorite literary characters. I love her so much. She's so funny and independent, but she loves her family so much, and she doesn't let anybody walk all over her. Although she does try to be polite about it. And she's so sure of herself, and she thinks she's so good at reading people, only to find out that she made several errors in judgment, and oh no, now things are very bad. And Mr. Darcy is our socially awkward king with a heart of gold. We love him. See, this is a perfect example of the enemies to lovers trope done right. And here's why I think that is. So, it's because they're both very three-dimensional characters, first off. And Lizzie genuinely dislikes him at first because of who he is, and because who he is not compatible with who she is, at least at the beginning, at least she thinks so. And I find most enemies to lovers tropes, the authors forget to actually make the characters dislike each other. Like, at most they just sort of like nag at each other and complain, but there's always that like super, super strong undercurrent of attraction that I just find confusing. Like, how am I supposed to believe that you genuinely dislike this person when you can't go a page without like bringing attention to his azure eyes or golden locks? Like, But Lizzie hears Mr. Darcy say one thing that offends her, so she instantly writes him off and just automatically assumes the worst about him. And no matter what he says, her mind like twists it to be something bad. And it's only when the reasoning behind his actions is revealed that she realizes, like, oh, I have made a grave mistake. And then she starts seeing him in a completely different light, and then she starts to fall for him because she had this terrible first impression of him, and she's learning to unlearn that terrible first impression. And that's just Lizzie and Darcy. There's a whole cast of characters who range from delightful to delightfully vexing, except for one. We don't like him. But yeah, anyway, I don't know what else to say about this book. I just love it a lot. It's my comfort read. I come back to it every time things are like not going so great up here or around here. And it always makes me feel a little bit better, and it just always makes me feel like maybe things are going to be okay after all. I love it a lot. I highly encourage you to read it. And that's it. That's the list. Those are all the Austen books and my thoughts on them. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know what you think of them. I would love to know what your favorites are, especially if it's not Pride and Prejudice, because I've yet to come across somebody whose favorite Jane Austen book is not Pride and Prejudice. And I would be delighted to find someone like that. So yeah, let me know down in the comments if you'd like me to do more in-depth reviews on, say, my favorites. I would love to. And yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Leia Like the Princess if you're interested, where you can also find my little embroidery and clothing store, Moonlit Cat Creations, or you can go directly to its website at moonlitcatcreations.com. And yeah, until next time, stay cozy.